This is nice. We get to have a nice little cozy conversation. The way that we wanted to start it off was by having the panelists, which includes myself, Dr. Shay Howell, Eric Williams, and Des from Michigan Roundtable to talk about roughly 5 minutes about not just who we are, but what our mission is in relation to the topic of this conversation. And then from there, we were going to have the video that Dr. Shay Howell has to show in relation to the murder of Hakeem Littleton, I believe, and then open it up for discussion. And so one thing to think about while people are, talking and giving their perspective from how they come to the work, it would be good for folks to think about how that reflects or doesn't reflect your own experiences and questions that you are seeking to get resolved as we, discuss and think about the question of community policing. So I will randomly choose Des to go first. Sorry, you were just right next to me, so that's why I did it.
No worries. Okay. So my name's Des. I work with the Michigan Roundtable for Diversity and Inclusion. I actually am a facilitator for AllPact, which stands for Advocates and Leaders for Police and Community Trust. It is a coalition that's comprised of community, civil rights, advocacy groups, and law enforcement leaders to examine issues affecting police and community relations. It's a space that's designed to have the difficult conversations, to share resources, as well as community-driven solutions. Just a brief caveat about the Michigan Roundtable. We operate from a critical race lens, and we center our work in lifting up the voices of those most oppressed and identifying the issues that most impact them, as well as driving the solutions within their communities and within their spaces. We also work on drawing connections to practices and policies that perpetuate systemic racism, and operate with being able to lead and advocate for dismantling those practices and policies. So I will pass it on.
Oh, thank you. Who would you like to pass it on to? Would you like to do that?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll pick Eric.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. So hi, everybody. My name is Eric Williams. I'm the senior staff attorney for the Detroit Justice Center. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the completely obvious goal of making Detroit a more just city. Our organization's belief is that you can't create a just city without addressing the legacy and impact of mass incarceration. And also that an important part of justice is economic justice. And so hence my practice group, which is the economic equity practice. Our organization is an abolitionist organization in terms of abolishing both the police and the carceral state. Though I also have to say this, my father is a retired lieutenant, Detroit Police Department, and my son will be graduating from the police academy in South Orange, New Jersey next month. And I personally know lots of people who I don't necessarily think should be on the street. So there is a sort of inherent tension between our organization's core beliefs and my own take on it. But I've kind of walked myself through this to a large degree, and I would love, and I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else's thoughts as we address sort of the realities of the actual danger that can be found in Detroit streets and the aspirations for eliminating the carceral state. And so, to whom shall I pass it next?
Well, I can go so that Dr. Howell can go last, and also introduce us to the video. So,
Okay.
yeah, thank you. My name is Tristan Taylor, and I'm one of the organizers and co-founders of Detroit Will Breathe, which itself is an organization that was kind of birthed through the fires of the struggle this summer around police brutality and systemic inequality. And I think the question of for justice means a question, what does it mean? What do communities need to actually keep them safe? And there's a way in which, that question has been posed, and from the standpoint of the community, quite frankly, has been answered many times. The question is when the issue rather is when the community gives an answer, no one actually listens to what they have to say. And so part of the slogan of defund the police, for the movement in Detroit and nationwide is about reshifting that, right? And making sure that our approach isn't a punitive one, that punishes behaviors that are a result of the material reality that people live in. And the lack of opportunity that so many people have. But it's also a question of thinking about what it means to have a policy and a police force and a carceral state that is punitive, that punishes, that doesn't know how to de-escalate situations for confrontations, but only brings escalation to situations and confrontations. And so that's something that I definitely look forward to talking more about. And I understand that, in Detroit, the streets can be dangerous. But I also understand that the supposed solution has not been a solution, and this is dangerous for Black and brown bodies as the very threat that they're supposed to be keeping us safe from. And so with that, I will pass it on to Dr. Howe. Oh, Shay, how you're muted? Yeah.
Sorry. I said I'm Shay. I'm glad that's not my dog barking. I have been with the Boggs Center for now almost 50 years, and I live in the Bagley neighborhood. We're in my house where I have lived for 40 some years, and I'm through the Boggs Center have been part of the Coalition for Police Transparency and Accountability. And I am sitting in for Gloria Aneb House, who had another commitment. So I'll do my best to bring her voice in, which is no small task, but we are fortunate because what I want to say about the coalition is that it began really with a cry of the heart. When Hakeem Littleton was killed, the chief of police quickly sent around a video on media. And because he was a police officer, he thought he would look at this and say, the guy deserved it because he pulled a gun. But many of us watched that video and saw something else. And Aneb, who is, I think, a gift to our city, with her words, sat down and wrote a letter. And it says at the top, "When Black lives don't matter, the DPD choice to apprehend or kill." And the subtitle is "Mourning Brother Hakeem Littleton." And she then says, "Another instance of coercive force by the DPD, and another young man is dead. No future for this young man, in which he might have grown into maturity, perhaps created a family and a fulfilling life in the city of his birth. A 19-year-old, disoriented, irrational, possibly traumatized by the sudden appearance of the police in his community. A young man digs for his gun. He fires it at a policeman, is tackled by the policeman. The gun falls from the young man's hand as he's pushed to the ground. The police video shows the young man on the ground on his stomach. The gun is no longer in his reach. He is still alive. The video shows that he raises his head. He appears to look around. 3 police officers are standing over his body. An arrest by the police at this point would have permitted the young man to continue his life, hopefully to find better, wiser days. And then she ends after a series of questions. Our community has lost yet another young Black life, and we, along with the Hakeem Littleton family, are grieving deeply. So she calls upon the community and legal-based community to say, can we provide support for the Littleton family and join with the thousands of Detroiters to bring an end to police killing? And that letter went out to many people, including the Detroit Justice Center as part of this coalition and many other, Detroit Will Breathe, to say, we need to do something. And the first thing we did was to take the video and try to demonstrate what are a series of community questions calling for an independent investigation. So this is a hard video to watch. Kevin, you're going to play it for us, I think. It's short, but if you'll just watch this.
On July 10th, 2020, officers of the Detroit Police Department fatally
Can you all hear it okay?
Yes.
shot Hakeem Littleton. At a press conference at 7:30 p.m. on the same day, Detroit Police Chief James Craig presented police videos of the incident.
Okay, you can roll.
As police officers approach, Hakeem digs for his gun. He appears to fire the gun towards a policeman and appears to be tackled by that policeman. It's unclear whether Hakeem fired additional shots. The video shows that he raises his head and appears to look around. The video then shows Hakeem on the ground on his stomach, straddled by a policeman. He is still alive. The police officers are not in danger. An arrest would have been possible at this point, and Hakeem would still be alive. Chief Craig outlined the details of the incident in the following manner. He tells us that a total of 8 shots were fired in 5 seconds, 4 shots by Hakeem, and a total of 4 shots by 3 police officers.
But 8 shots fired in 5 seconds. 8 shots fired in 5 seconds. 4 fired by 3 officers. 1 officer fired 2 shots. 1 officer fired 1 shot, and another fired 1 single shot. And then 4 shots fired by the suspect.
Fuck you, Richard Ford, man. Shots fired!
At what point is Hakeem first struck by a gunshot? Was he shot as he was falling to the ground? How close are the officers to Hakeem's body? How many times was he wounded? Chief Craig reported that Hakeem was struck 4 times, including 1 shot to his head.
I want to take note, at some point you see what appears to be the officer kicking something that was the suspect's gun. That's when you saw the kicking motion, he was actually kicking the gun away from the reach of Mr. Littleton.
The chief said also that 3 officers were involved in the killing. How many police officers do you count in the scene? How many appear to be pointing their guns at Hakeem? Does it appear to you that the officers' lives are in danger? Do you think the officers had the option to arrest Hakeem rather than kill him? Given all these questions and given the police legacy of misinformation and cover-ups of excessive force? How credible is the chief's report? An independent, impartial investigation will answer all these questions. In this global uprising against police violence, we Detroiters cannot sit by passively and have our young Black men die in the streets of excessive police force. Their lives matter. Black lives matter. Our community demands an investigation of this killing of Hakeem Littleton, thereby offering our support to the Littleton family and joining ranks with thousands in Detroit and around the world to bring an end to police killings.
I just maybe want to give people a moment. I have some things I want to say beyond the film, but does anybody want to respond or say anything right now? Okay, I guess from the coalition standpoint, one of the first things we did was hold a press conference and share this video. And we've tried to share it in numerous places. And we have asked the state attorney general to investigate. She has not responded. We have asked the prosecutor to investigate, the county prosecutor. She has not responded. We have asked the police commission to investigate. They have not responded. And we have tried to talk to the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, and they have told us it's not their problem. So one of the things we have established pretty clearly is that nobody wants to really investigate police killings in our city, and that we need to create a strong reaction to that. Based on those efforts and calls for an independent investigation, the second thing we decided we needed to do was to help people understand that the characterization of Hakeem Littleton by the media and by the Detroit police as a thug, a kid who pulled his gun, was a complete mischaracterization of this young man. Can you imagine the terror he must have felt seeing those men grabbing his friend? Those guys were not even there after Hakeem Littleton. They had come to arrest a friend, and Hakeem was just walking down the street. He just left his house one day down the town San Juan and was killed. Yes, he pulled a gun. Yes, he made mistakes. But that did not mean that the police had to kill him, as you can see clearly in the video. In order to help people understand that, we held a people's tribunal, since clearly no other official body would. And you can see that on the Detroit Will Breathe website, where people testify about the kind of person Hakeem was, about his family, about his love for his neighbors, about probably his misguided effort to defend his friend in the face of these police, and about what a loss he is to the community. So that tribunal is available, and the coalition is committed to getting that story out. The next thing we have done is we held public hearings along with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, State Senator Stephanie Chang, Raquel Castaneda-Lopez from the Detroit City Council, and President Pro Tem Mary Sheffield from the Detroit City Council. And we hosted those hearings where we showed the Hakeem Littleton video. We had people talk about their experience with the Detroit police. We had people from the immigrant community talk about their experience. We had protesters talk about their experience, and we had the opportunity to get some history about policing in Detroit. And over 3,000 people viewed that public hearing, and we're going to make that available in 4 segments. So our job, I think, as people said in the earlier session, is to say we have to ask who benefits from what story, and how often are these young people and old people and very young people who are being killed, how often are they cast as, oh, they deserved it? And it's up to us to make sure people have a different view. So I'll open up for discussion, and Kristen, I think you're going to facilitate that part.
Sure. So first off, everyone should feel free to say what they have to say. This is a space of open discussion and debate, and so people should not feel like they should hold anything back. I guess one of the questions that we had talked about that we wanted to ask folks is, what is your vision for safety and community? As we talk about the justice and peace in neighborhoods, what does that mean to you in light of the video that we just saw and the history that's been brought up and issues of the summer's protests? How do you see these questions from your standpoint, from your experience? And our panelists can, go into that too. I don't know. And tell me if that was a bad question. That was just what we had. I'm sorry.
So, okay. All right, so let me say this. I think this is a very bad case to use as a basis for the problems with the police, right? I'm a native Detroiter. I grew up here. I grew up over on Marlow near Finkel. So it's not like So that's where I grew up. And I remember as a kid being afraid that my father wouldn't come home, right? He worked undercover, and it was one of my biggest fears, right? That my father wouldn't come home because of something happening on the street, like somebody just walking up and down the street with a gun and deciding to point a gun at my father's head and pull the trigger. That kind of thing disturbed me. So I will acknowledge that, that shapes my belief on this. And initially, the idea of eliminating, for example, the police is something that I couldn't even begin to wrap my head around, particularly after seeing that, right? A video like that and other things. I've been shot at dozens of times in my life. The only time I've ever had with the police actually took place in New York. But what I would say is that ultimately the abolition of the entity that we think of that currently exists, that we call the police, right? The abolition of that should be all of our goals, because we should want a society where it is unnecessary to have that kind of institution populating our streets. I think it is difficult. It is difficult to underestimate the tension that I think a lot of people feel. And, I get, the tension that Detroiters feel when it comes to worrying about the police. And at the same time, you are worried about other members of your community who have had a poor education, little opportunity to fulfill their potential, live in an environment that is oppressive at so many times, right? So there's a tension between those two fears. And I would love to say that personally, that's not something I worry about. I'm 5'11", 230. I do walk around with my 9, right? Real talk. So, but that doesn't mean that I want the police as they are. But that's just me. And as I said, I have because of my family history, right, I have a very distinct perspective, and I recognize its limitations, and I just wonder how other people are feeling about this. Is that tension unique to me, or are there other people who sort of feel that?
And anybody can feel free to give an answer to that question for sure. About that tension, I mean, is there something, Des, that you want to say something about that? Because I kind of know that that's, some of kind of your positionality is kind of between both of those worlds of community and police. So I don't know if you wanted to, say something about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was interesting to just see some of the commentary and watching the responses that were happening within like social media after the death of Hakeem, and that there was like argument about that it was justified coming from community. It was like that it was justified because he shot first. Then there was commentary about that was extended even into Hakeem's family and I know when we moved into conversation within the All-Pac space, we would have the summer off, not because of summer programming that so many organizations and law enforcement have, but we had decided to continue meeting throughout the summer after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, because we saw the tensions rising within policing community. And so when we watched the conversation and we moved it into the All-Pac space, and that there was a sense of challenge around what is safety, what does community policing look like, and we pushed hard into having discussion around that, and seeing that tension in that, like with what you were talking about, Eric, it definitely exists in that. Like we see this space about being able to push for the dismantling of a system that is out there killing Black people, killing people of color. But on the flip side, even in the All-Pac space, and that seeing community members who couldn't visualize having a world without police, made it for an interesting conversation on that. So when we started talking about what does defunding police really mean, what does that look like, we had to step it back, and that just to visualize and encourage members on both sides of the fence to think about, like, what could a reality look like, and what can a reality look like when people aren't operating from a survivalist space, and that where needs are being met, where you're getting healthcare, where you're getting job security, you're getting food, you have housing security. So being able to reel that back and thinking about, like, if we're in a place where community is being taken care of, then do we really need policing? Do we need police presence? And so that's a space that's still being worked out and being developed in that, and that tension definitely exists in that. But I think John Powell, he recently wrote a piece in that was working about trying to recenter the conversation about looking at safety, and that while police want to be able to go home, community wants to be able to go home too, and everybody's got that right to safety. And so thinking about that question from the perspective of what does that safety look like, has the opportunity to be able to open up that conversation in a different perspective.
Des, could I say something? and we already know what this looks like, right? I mean, to some degree, right? If you want to look at a community where you don't have, surplus weapons on the road, constant surveillance, police all over the place, right? Stop and frisk. Just look east of Alta Road, right? Look north of 8 Mile. I mean, we already know what that looks like. And what you're seeing there, right? You don't see those things, but what you do see is investment in education, investment in infrastructure. You see job opportunities. Those are the things you see there. And that's where the money that's currently being spent on police, in my mind, should be spent, which leads us toward, in the way I see it, that evolution toward a society where the institution we call the police has no need, right? But even in those places, you still see men and women with no training and guns showing up to deal with people in the middle of a mental health crisis, or people in who are just simply homeless, where we have completely criminalized poverty, right? You still see that even in places where you don't have the same kind of overbearing police presence that you have in most cities, right? So it's clearly a path, but we've stopped. I mean, that's the problem. Even in places where they've done a lot of the things where they could be taking those steps, they just stopped. That's part of the problem. But we can't. But I think I think we're selling ourselves short when we say we don't know what this looks like, because we do. We do. East of Alta Road, we know where it is.
If I can, I know you want to respond to that, Des. If I can get Shay in, and then you can respond to that, if that's okay.
I definitely think there is the question of how we build our communities and what support we give for people. But I'm going to be 75 soon. And I want us to think about historically this whole notion of who is violent. As a white lesbian, the place to live was the city of Detroit, not Livonia when I was a young person, or not Dearborn, or not Birmingham, because it was well understood that the Black community was a safer community than a white community. I think if you're an interracial couple, people did not go to Livonia. People did not go to Warren. They came to Detroit because the city had a sense of openness. And when I was young, the image of peace was a Black man in jeans. And when I got to be old, the image of violence was a Black man in jeans. And I have to ask, what happened in those 60 years? How did that come to be? That is not because of poverty, because I'll tell you, people were really poor in 1960. And yet there was a sense of safety in this community. There's a wonderful film that features Maureen Taylor about the Brewster Projects. And she talks about how she couldn't find the key to her house when she moved out because they'd never locked the door. So I just want to invite us, and I'm glad you said how our experiences shape us, Eric, that we have lived through a half century of bombardment, telling people who are Black and brown that they are criminal, and that they should be afraid of each other. And that shapes how we function. That's why it's so important to say what happened to Hakeem was not justified. That shouldn't happen to anybody. No young man should be put in that position, period. He should never have gone to the spot where he felt he even had to pull a gun. And that's where we start to unpack. So just the last thing I'll say. If our TV news cameras were in the emergency rooms in Beaumont Hospital every day, we would have a very different image of who's violent in this country. Because as a white woman, I am safer on my motorcycle at night on East Grand Boulevard than I would be if I were going home to my husband in Birmingham, because 1 in 4 of them are getting beat up, and motorcycles are way safer than that. So, it's like our whole system of how we think about police, about violence, about where anger comes from. Those are the things we can unpack. And we can unpack that if we think historically, if we think about when are our best moments of safety, and what do we really need to feel secured and loved. We can do that.
Can I jump in, Tristan, really quickly?
Please do. And in fact, I was going to add, is that okay, Des? Because I was going to
Go for
ask
it.
you to elaborate on your points in the chat, especially about the point about most times community is en route home, because there's something like very subtle about that. And I was wondering.
Yeah. So I'm gonna start from this before I forget. I've been writing down some stuff and then I'll go back to that. Just comment on what Shay says. So I would have to disagree with some of that, because even with the cameras going in, right? You have to also remember the people who are behind the cameras, who are in charge of media. This country is very, very clear who's violent and who isn't. The people who are controlling this narrative know exactly what they're doing, and it's intentional to show Black people specifically being violent. That's very intentional. It's not a mistake. They're very, very clear. So I would definitely have to disagree with you on that point. To the point I made in the chat, going back up about the jeans. Black men in jeans, Black women in a skirt have always been a threat, even in the 60s, in the 40s, in the 30s, to racists, period. Emmett Till was 14 years old. Those 4 little girls on September 15th, 1960, didn't hurt anybody. They were little girls. So it doesn't matter. To racists, we all the same. I'm Black with a red. I'm a Black woman, 47 years old, with glasses and a hat with a red under the bottom. I'm a threat to racists. And then because I'm an educated Black woman, I'm really a threat to them. My son is 13 years old with a 10.5 size shoe, 170 pounds. He's 5'4.5". He's literally 1.5 inches under me. He's 13 though. And to him, to other people, he poses a threat, but he's a kid. So it doesn't matter for us. It doesn't, and that's sad. My ex-husband said years ago, racism is a heart condition. That's what has to change. That's what we need to be working on. And if we can start tapping into people's hearts and change the way, not the way that they think about us, that's the easy part. Once it moves from the thought process to here, that's the bigger problem, because this is what people feel with. It gets in here in their heart and their spirit. We could change the people's mindset, but once it starts to seep inside of here, you know what I'm saying? The same way that we love, how strong you love something and love someone, people hate just as strong. That's what we have to work on changing. And that's why it's so important, at least for me, and when we teach, when it comes to our so-called allies that look like these races, that's why we tap you to do that work with them. Because if you say you're an ally and you get it and you understand, and if we teach you that, then it's up to you to start to work on the people that look like you to change that with them, because they're not going to receive it from us because we're the threat. And that's how they view us. And it's unfortunate, but it's the truth, right? And you have the power to be able to change that with them. Just like even with us inside of our race, with the biases that some of us have, right? And a lot of us have a biases towards other races or people, especially white people, that have been brought on because of history, right? But because in this work, we come to work with other races and become comrades, then we can say, no, Shay is not a racist. I can stand on that and say she's not. But I can do that work, because if Shay gets up there and trying to say that to my people, they're looking at Shay like, nah. But I can do that work because I can vouch for Shay. And they'll listen to me before they hear it from you. That's how comrades work. That's camaraderie. And that's the work I think that we have to get to. That was the kind of point out. And that's what we teach. That's how I was raised, and my teachings from my mom, from her mom, who are all activists. And I'm in New Orleans. We don't, have as much as, the bigger city issues as in Detroit, but we still have the issues of racism like everybody else. We still have the issues of segregation, like so many of the cities, small or large, and it's unfortunate. We have the issues of gentrification, and which is a smaller issue inside of being pushed out, right? So we have all of those things. So we, I think that I love seeing this. This is my first time. I love seeing this. My first time in this group, but I'm on Zoom. Like I got to get off in an hour because I got another group I got to get on. But just to see this beautiful array of people coming together and saying, look, we know we have to do something about these issues. I was listening to Eric when I first came on, and I was like, this brother laying it down. Like, we have so much work that we know we have to do, and connecting with people from all over, from me, is important, because I can say this was going on in Detroit. And so if we can connect with folks in Detroit and I can say, okay, I may not be able to fly to Detroit now, but we connecting here. I can go to somewhere in New Orleans and say, hey, this is how we doing in Detroit. I'm in Atlanta right now. So if we can do this work all over, this is how we combat racism and racists. So that's my 10 cents.
Well, thank you for that 10 cents.
Thank you.
It's of high value. Des, I don't know if you wanted to say something. I definitely wanted to, just add a couple of words. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead, please do so.
Sure. I mean, I could go ahead. Like, I'll just say two things. I will have to be a bit controversial and disagree with the idea that is white people's job to speak for us to other white people. Because the problem is, until white people can hear us clearly, then the challenge of racism is something that still has to be overcome. And the truth of the matter is, no one can speak for us. They can speak with us, for sure, absolutely. But to delegate the task of dealing with white people to our allies, I think because I don't need a spokesperson in a way. Like I can speak clearly for myself. And if you can't hear me, that's your problem that you have to get over. And we have to start teaching people that. That's how we get over things. And to me, challenging racism isn't just merely challenging how people feel. Like, sure, but here's the thing. I don't care if you like me or not. Respect for me has nothing to do with that. In fact, I don't require that you like me. That shouldn't be a requirement to treat me with respect. And I think our challenge is tackling the systemic ways in which that racism is embedded in people and how they think and feel, because in a lot of ways it is a projection of how we are as minority people, as people of color, treated by this authority. Like, so if you live in the suburbs and you kind of think, well, Black people, like they live terrible, or like, they make terrible decisions, just look at their city. I mean, if you look at the death rate between Black and white people, like, there's a huge discrepancy. And so one could say, oh, that's because you don't live right. But what does that mean for us to not live right? It ain't just because like all of us just eating pork chops as if white people don't eat pork. Or something like that, right? Like it's about the ways in which we are treated by the system, all the ways in which our bodies are treated, valued, and devalued, right? And I think that part of what and I really like Eric's point that like if we want to think about a world with less policing, we can go to the suburbs and where when the community says they need to maintain their schools, they get to maintain their schools as spaces for young people to develop their opportunity. Where in places like Detroit, every single public school that I went to is closed. I can't even get a copy of my high school diploma because when they closed my school, they didn't transfer those documents anywhere. Just that little thing means so much to what the city has offered. And in Detroit, we're experiencing being pushed out and gentrified too. And what we are seeing with that, and that's the question, that I want to be able to explore, to me, is a kind of over policing and hyper surveillance of Black spaces and Black people in particular, and a resurgence of segregation within the city that feeds this dynamic of the need for police officers to be well equipped with tools and resources and money to handle the dangerous nemesis that threatens the future development of like Detroit. So, that also includes a policy of giving abatements and money to white people in suits when they come looking to develop. And when Black people who've been overtaxed want their money back, we ain't got nothing for them. We can't even give them a tax credit. We can give developers that ain't put nothing in the city a tax credit, but we can't even get our own folks who paid extra a tax credit. And that's something that, to me, is part of how we devalue the everyday experience. And the way that we seek to solve those questions is through aggressive policing instead. But I saw Eric had his hands up, and I don't know, Des, if you wanted to still say something, but.
Sure. Yeah, no, and that's kind of just like bumping back into to the comment around like most times communities in route home, and and just thinking about like, yes, looking into the suburbs and that and looking at their policing, there's a lot of intentionality and a lot of time dedicated within those policing practices about keeping Black bodies, keeping people of color out of those suburban spaces. And that we see very intentional the pulling of resources from the city of Detroit. And one of the things that I tried to present and that I pose within the all-pack space net is taking on a regional perspective. We can't be looking at any of these municipalities, any city in isolation of that, and we have to be looking at Detroit as the anchor and the root that it is in this region, and what happens in Detroit has a direct impact and reverberates within the suburbs, and that the suburbs have a responsibility to be able to help alter that. And I'm totally on board with that. It takes the upper level of changing of policies and practices if we're going to be able to see any type of change in that, because we need that accountability. We need that oversight in order to be able to affect that change in that, and the rest will, and the rest will follow in that. But we have to be putting that pressure on the systemic level in order to be able to get that to reverberate. Because if you have officers who are operating from biased and from a racist lens, and that whether they know it or not, and that by just following those racial profiling, and that's like, oh, you look like you're part of this neighborhood, oh, you're not, just by seeing that very basic profiling, if they are not allowed to do that and I'm not allowed to operate from a you look like you belong and don't belong, then those individual behaviors and individual interactions are going to start shifting. But we have to have that policy change in order to see it come down into that individual level.
Thank you for that. Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I was gonna say, one of the most discouraging things, and I think because I agree with what Des is saying, talking about policy changes, but one of the most discouraging things is that a lot of the problematic behaviors that we see from individual officers are migrating to technology, right? So Project Greenlight is a perfect example of the kind of hyper surveillance we see in communities of color, designed not so much to keep communities safe, but designed to keep communities in check. Now, I don't even want to go into sort of like the civil liberties implications, but it doesn't take too much. But you don't have to imagine what it looks like when the police have the ability to surveil everyone all the time, and particularly when we live in a time where the laws restricting the ability of the police to intrude into what is essentially sort of your private life or to destroy your right to anonymity. The laws haven't caught up with it yet. And this is what we've seen with technology over and over again. You can look at COINTELPRO, Ghetto Informant Program, surveillance, NYPD surveillance of Muslims, not just in New York, but across the country in the wake of 9/11. Given the technology, the police will abuse it, and this abuse will track the same sort of racist, quasi-fascist, behavior that we've seen before. And as we sit here and protest, the police cars in the streets, but ignore the cameras overhead, we are just simply allowing all these issues to migrate to the next generation of technology, and it's really problematic. You're exactly right. This isn't that that we need changes in policy, because we are not going to be able to affect changes in the human hearts of every police officer, and so ultimately it is going to be policy and oversight and consequences that are actually going to make a change. But the problem with policy, with seeking policy changes, is that it requires the engagement of the community, and the community is in many respects so beaten down that the kind of consistent engagement that's necessary is really difficult to pull off. Now, I may just be a pessimist. I have a dark side, sort of by nature, and I hope I'm wrong, but that's kind of where I feel we are to a large degree. And let me stop rambling.
Yeah, go ahead, Shay.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Project Greenlight. I also work with Riverwise, and we did a really extensive issue on that. We've been opposing this, but part of what we're arguing is that we should have Project Green chairs, not Project Greenlight. That we need more green chairs out on our front porches, and more grandmas and grandpas sitting on those green chairs and watching what's happening in the community. So we've created a Project Green Chairs, and we have kids building green chairs, holding workshops in their community to talk about what makes us safe, and talking about we'll build and give you this green chair if you pledge to sit on it X times. Because I think what we've got to do, on what you were saying, Eric, is people are beaten down. People have forgotten, or maybe have not even been allowed to imagine themselves as creating safety as they watch each other. And that's something we can build. And as we build that, we begin to build community power that can actually then get some of these policy changes. And then the last thing I'll say about that is I worked some with the Coalition Against Police Brutality, and you probably all know this, but the most dangerous thing for a police officer to respond to is a domestic violence claim. That's when most people get killed, either the police officer or somebody involved in that. Now, domestic violence is completely in our control. It is completely in our capacity to stop. We need to figure out how to create the skills with each other, where we learn those about how to de-escalate things, and how do we use our neighbors and our friends to de-escalate things.
I wanted to interrupt here. You guys, this is a great discussion, and I'm doing my best to get your thoughts down. But I don't know if you saw the announcement. The time was changed till 6, and it is now 5:40, coming up to 5:45.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I just wanted to add something briefly to that. Like, I think that part of the problem is if communities are having a hard time kind of reimagining themselves or discovering themselves, it is because of the assault that these communities have had against them in their attempt to build and do exactly that. And I think about Detroit, and I think about how it was the place that was in a whole lot of ways the citadel of middle-class Blackdom, right? It led the nation to home ownership. In a lot of ways, that was a double-edged sword, because it was something that, we were able to build upon and establish inheritance to our kids and create stability. But there's also a way in which it helped further the stratification too, as we attempted to mold ourselves into like values that meant that we isolated our obligation to each other to just our homes. But even within that, right, we still, because of our traditions of social struggle, we're doing our best to make sure we had social activities, social investment, in our communities. And it was the state that took that away. When Detroit was slated to have $1 billion invested into our schools, the state created an academic emergency in order to be able to take over the school district and misuse those funds. So 5 years after state rule, we're $250 million in deficit, right? It's the state who closed down not just quote unquote failing schools, but schools like Catholic Ferguson that actually were thriving and presented alternatives to pregnant teens as a way to not only raise their kids in a nurturing environment as they continue their process of education, but really allow them to like have alternatives and options for the future. And so there's something about the insidious nature of racism that means that the progress that we make is always constantly under attack. And so one of the ways I think about that is the way in which all those things are taken away, and what we prioritize are in reality propagandas of safety. So we create the condition of poverty that creates an unsafe environment, and then we say, oh, here's green light. Now, we don't solve crimes using green light. In truth, Detroit Police Department has a terrible rate of solving crimes, but at least it's here to make you feel okay. Like, it's not giving you actual safety and protection, but at least we get to say it is. And in particular, for businesses that are looking to do business here, we got something for you, so that, the threat of someone stealing your property, because we emphasize the protection of property and value over lives. And so that's why, to me, one of the only ways that we get that policy change is by defunding the police, is by taking away what we know are tools that don't keep us safe, that just keep us in check, right? And make sure that those resources go back to practices in our communities that includes having neighborhood functions and social spaces. And why is it Detroit investing in public housing? We have this housing crisis all across the country, and yet no one talks about the need for more public housing. We're letting the private sector that we know doesn't solve issues but create them somehow be the place where we go to solve this. And to me, that's a problem. And again, part of the shifting in the policy, because quite frankly, I don't think we could change the nature of policing. Is too racist, the foundation of it, quite frankly. We just have to eliminate and create alternatives to that. But you can't use the master's tools for freedom. That's why it's got to go. But that's all I got to say. And I don't know if anyone else, because we should open it up. Yeah, I just wonder for some of the other folks, is what we're saying not relatable? What are some of the things that you're pulling out? What are some of the questions that you might also be having as well? Because we know that this isn't necessarily an easy question, not because of the way we can't conceptualize it, but just how embedded these institutions are, right? So I'm just throwing that out there. Don't feel obligated to speak. I'm just trying to offer space for it.
Well, I'll make a quick comment. Gosh, there are just so many really powerful messages from all the speakers tonight. And I guess I think about just a number of different pressure points that have to happen to shift the institution itself. Thinking about how we train and recruit people, let's create a training or a recruiting that tells people, defines public safety in the way that we all decide it should be, and then send that message to recruits and people that we're training. And then people say, oh, well, that's not what I thought it was. The ones who want to, play cops and robbers. So on that side, the side of bringing people into the institution, put pressure on that and try to bring some better humans into this space. On the other side, people have mentioned policy, enforcing policies, police, they agree to laws and policies when they take the job. So if they're not upholding those, then there have to be consequences. But sometimes there'll be a law or there'll be a policy that somebody follows, but somebody still gets hurt. Got to change those policies. At the state level, I think, I come from it from an educational lens. So let me just say that. And my mom was a correctional officer, the first female correctional officer in Washtenaw County. So I've been around police a lot in my life. I grew up in Ypsi, and I moved into the city in 2013. Hakeem was murdered about a half mile from my house. I walked over to the 12th. I don't know. There's a lot of things running through my mind. It's just, it's a really painful situation to think about. I don't walk around with the same fears that many of my friends and neighbors do. But I care about what happens to everybody that I live around, and so I ran for a failed attempt at police commissioner. I tried. But I just think that, and I don't know if that's the answer either. I think community members are really tired. I talked to a lot of community members. That was the highlight of my experience, talking to voters, talking to my neighbors, knocking on doors. Even during the pandemic, I just wore a mask and stepped back and asked people, what does public safety mean to you? What do you hope to see? Did you know about the police commission? And it was a fabulous experience getting to know, getting the support of a lot of people that I respect and care about in my neighborhood and my friends, and then meeting voters. So I look at it, I guess my lens is very educational. And also I'll just add one more thing about sort of the messages that we get sent about who we are and what spaces we belong in and what society tells us about that and how we internalize that and how that harms people in many ways. That I think about, and also the criminalization of Blackness in of children, because I teach teachers. So I really work hard to try to, that's an institution, education, that has a lot of issues too. And so trying to sort of dismantle those ideas as we send teachers out into the space where they're going to be working. But thinking about, that school to prison pipeline, which there's a new term for it. I apologize. Maybe somebody knows what it is and I'm not remembering it, but, just thinking about, I often talk to my students in developmental psychology and in educational psychology about the consequences of normal developmental rebellion that people might engage in, and how for some people, there's a high price to pay for just doing normal stuff that normal kids do. And just seeing children for children, I think if we just start for me, that's a huge message in trying to start in that space, saying, a kid's gonna steal a car, my husband stole a car in Livonia when he was a kid. I know friends that stole cars, right? The kids do rebellious things, and I think the example of, what does community policing look like, or what does police reform look like? It looks like the suburbs. When your neighbor's kid steals a car, you go say like, hey, what's going on? We don't want them to get in trouble, or, and even if police pull people over, how they respond to youth. Seeing children as the children that they are, noticing their developmental level, noticing what they're capable of. And that's what really is, I think, just a heartbreaker for me with Mr. Littleton and his murder, is that he was a child who felt threatened and scared and ended up dead. And it's just tragic.
I want to chime in really quickly. So Deborah, like you, I'm an educator. I've been an educator over 20 years. That's one of the hats. And I'm listening to the stuff that you're saying. And as a Black educator, I feel like that too. As a Black mother, I feel like that. I want people to see my Black children as just children. However, that's just not their reality. I had a conversation, a meeting this week with my daughter's teacher, one of her teachers, the principal for her grade level. She was a sophomore at in a magnet program at a school here in Atlanta, and the counselor. We have been trying to have this meeting for months. The teacher is a white male. My issue with him was issues of racism. I don't know him from a can of paint. Couldn't pick him out in the lineup. I didn't approach him as an educator. I always wait, but if I got to use it, I will. I went to him as a mother. The assignments that some of the assignments that came up with him that I witnessed, that her dad witnessed, were racist issues. To the point that she was negatively impacted by it and traumatized. And I brought it up to him and I said, I don't know you, but and that doesn't mean, you may not be racist. You can be implicit in it. And then during this time is when we need to be extremely sensitive when we're talking about children. Especially in the environment that you're teaching in. The environment, the school is very diverse in terms of race, and everything else too. It's a phenomenal school. He could not understand it at all. We were on the phone for an hour, and he did not get it at all. And I tried to explain it to him 10 different ways to Sunday. He just wasn't getting it. He ended up telling me at the end, because he had to have the last word. I love all of my students. We are under God. We're supposed to love them, everybody equally. And that's what the Bible says. And And I said to him, people use that same Bible and that same God to do horrible things to my people. And I need you to remember that. So my point to you is that I hear what you're saying. And I promise you, I appreciate you. And like you, I teach teachers through a program called Rethink. That is my job, to empower Black teachers to do this work. We are still faced with these issues every single day. And it's so unfortunate, this fight. So we definitely need people like you to keep pushing back against that. Because he didn't see what he did wrong at all. My daughter said a hero was Assata Shakur. He could have died. And he was very dismissive to her. That was the issue. But he did not understand it. So we need people like you to keep pushing that with others, with other teachers. Like you say, you teach teachers. So that's just what I want to chime in and say that. So thank you for that.
Is there, I know we got maybe 3 minutes. I don't know if folks want to have some final words or comments.
Y'all been so amazing. I'm telling y'all, y'all don't understand. I'm about to go brag on y'all in the next Zoom.
Now, I've certainly, appreciated the discussion. I know it's a hard one, and one that you could feel like, there's a way in which the question is, okay, we're having these discussions, like how do we, carry that into action? And I definitely think that begs the need for these conversations to continue. We have a number of organizations there's looking to do that. And I just think that this is also the moment to be bold. This summer has seen a historic movement where the people in the streets are demanding just that. And whatever solutions that we are thinking about, we have to think in that reign, because we are facing dire situations, and there's no reason for us to think that we can do this incrementally or without having some real radical transformation and policy.
Yes.
Funding is one of those that's scary, but we ought to be really scared and ashamed to continue the way we are. That's what's scarier, in fact. So
yeah.
I don't know, Shay or Des or Eric.
Well,
okay.
I am really appreciative of this conversation, and I am especially appreciative of our ability to talk about contradictions in us as well as out there. I think that's key to changing everything.
Is that what you asked me to tell you? Yeah. If my future wife wants to speak to me, make an excuse. No, I loved it. That's what I was gonna say too, Shay. This is like, I think maybe I'm being honest, probably the first Zoom that I've been on since we've been doing this the pandemic that has really been truly honest. Like everybody who spoke up just honestly spoke up. Everybody took the feedback and then we kept it moving. Like I've been on a Zoom where it's a bunch of white folks, and when I just speak, it don't matter to me. I don't care how you feel. And they be looking at me like, okay, here we go. They don't want to talk about it. Everybody here just kind of taking a stride, like, okay, this is what we got to do then, you know? And that's what you're looking for. We're talking about making a change, making a difference, you know?
Yeah, no, thank you. So I'm not sure how this works. Like, fit back into we probably don't, because I don't know, like normally, because this is a breakout session, normally they're like, oh, it's time up, and then we join the main session, but I'm not exactly sure. I imagine. Oh, see, here we go. Okay, just in time. See, ask questions, you get answers. That's how. All right. Well, it was a conversation. Appreciate everyone, and look forward to future conversations and taking this on to the next one. All right. Thank you. Yeah, our segment was part of a presentation with the Detroit Justice Center and the Coalition for Police Transparency and Accountability, and ALPAC, Detroit Will Breathe. We had a one could call sobering and difficult yet open discussion that was grounded in us watching a video that was presented by the Coalition for Police Transparency and Accountability of the police shooting and death of Hakeem Littleton in the neighborhood. And from there, asked the question, what does it mean to create policing and safety for communities, and what are our thoughts about that? And, it brought up questions that range from the ways in which Black and brown bodies are criminalized, including young Black and brown bodies, like children, and how children aren't seen as children. We talked about the ways in which the question of policing is tied to not only systemic racism, but in particular, the policing of Black bodies where they can and can't go. And so in ways, maintaining the racism and segregation that exists in society, and just talked about like what it means to, put resources into communities that actually keep folks safe, and what it means to listen to those communities when they say what resources they need in order to do that. So certainly it was a conversation that needs to continue, and really more about people kind of sharing and expressing their concerns, knowing that the issue of safety is a real thing, but thinking of how to reimagine that without the punitive practices and policies of the police department and the carceral state. So that was it.
Wow, sounds robust. Thank you for sharing, Tristan. We appreciate it.